Hello again. Nice to see you here for Lesson 7. By now, you have probably gotten into the habit of having your student guidebook and a pencil ready next to you, in case we need to use it during the video lesson. Sometimes we will use the guidebook and sometimes we won't, but you should always have it by your side when you watch a video lesson. In the last lesson, Lesson 6, I talked with you about choices and how you are the only one who can decide to choose being mean and dishonest or being nice and truthful. You can make that choice anytime you want. It's up to you. Friends and other people can't control your choices, but it's true that they can make it harder and more confusing. So let's today talk about the influence of other people. Here we go. There is a big misunderstanding that gets people in trouble sometimes, even adults. A teacher I know once called it the problem of the 5 naughty grandchildren. I'll tell you the story. An old grandfather was baking special cookies for his old friends who were coming over to the house later that Saturday afternoon to play card games. Grandpa made the sweetest and best choco chip cookies you've probably ever seen, and of course, his grandchildren loved them. He asked his 5 grandchildren to leave the cookies alone, to not take even one, since he only had enough sugar today to make the exact number of cookies he would need for his guests. For their patience, he promised that he would make fresh cookies for the grandchildren the next day, but repeated that today's cookies were not for them, and they should leave them alone. He asked each of them if they understood, and one by one, each of the 5 grandchildren said, "Yes, Grandpa, I understand. These cookies are not for me, and I should leave them alone." The next grandchild said the same thing, and the next, and so on, until all of them had made the promise. As soon as he had removed the warm cookies from the oven, the old grandfather went upstairs to change into nicer clothes. Once their old grandfather was out of the kitchen, his grandchildren started talking. They agreed that they should take one, just one, big sweet cookie, break it into pieces, and share it among them, so that even if Grandpa did notice that a cookie was missing, none of them would be in very much trouble. They would split the cookie 5 ways so that each of them would only be just a little bit in trouble. Just as they would share the cookie 5 ways, they could share the blame 5 ways, and that seemed like it couldn't really be so bad. As the old grandfather came back into the kitchen, he froze, seeing immediately that one of the cookies was missing. They had rarely seen Grandpa angry about anything before, but as his face grew red and his lips tightened, they realized that this was going to be one of those times. He was mad, but saying nothing, he calmly carried the remaining cookies out to the living room as his guests were just starting to arrive. For several days, the old grandfather seemed sad and different, but said nothing to his grandchildren about the cookie. Finally, the 5 grandchildren got together and approached their grandfather as he sat in his chair reading a magazine. As agreed, they all apologized in one rather loud and simultaneous, "We're sorry we took the cookie, Grandpa." Grandpa looked up at all of them kindly, but said nothing, and then returned to his reading. The oldest grandchild, Simon, decided to speak up, to explain to his grandfather that he should not be very upset with them since none of them alone had taken a whole cookie. All 5 had just shared one, so each should only be a little bit in trouble. Each had only been a little bit dishonest. Taking the cookie, the children agreed, was everyone's idea together. Again, the old grandfather looked at them tenderly but said nothing. Sensing that Simon's explanation was not helping the situation, the children began blaming each other, each saying that taking the cookie wasn't their idea and that the other 4 should be punished, but not them. After a minute or two, the old grandfather stopped the blaming, arguing children and calmly explained, "I don't have 5 pieces of grandchildren that make into one. I have 5 full separate grandchildren. Each one is unique and special, and not a part or a piece of the others. And each one uses their own head to make their own choices." The children did not really understand. "Each of you made your own decision to do what was done. The others didn't make you do it. I asked each of you one by one to be trustworthy, and one by one each of you promised. You can't share responsibility for your own choices. The full responsibility belongs to each of you, separately." The children understood now. Trying to lessen the blame by sharing it was silly, and splitting one cookie was no better than if they had just taken their own. "I forgive you each, alone, separately, but I can't forgive all of you at once. You don't all share the same brain, so you can't all share the blame." In that story, each of the children were trying to hide their own bad choice behind the bad choices of the others, hoping that their own choice-making wouldn't really be noticed very much. But it always is noticed. Many people misunderstand this, and so they are surprised by the trouble they face when they join others in making bad choices. Probably everyone who hears this story knows that the grandchildren should not have taken the cookie in the first place, because it's important to keep promises. At least that's what most people believe, that promises should be kept. If you believe that also, then you have identified something called a value. Another example of a value would be it's important to tell the truth. These are 2 values that most people will say they have. Most people have several values, and when you put them together, it's called a personal code. Personal codes are very useful because they help us decide what choices to make in confusing situations, like the grandchildren with the cookies. Confusing situations can happen a lot. So if we know what our values are, or what our parents' and grandparents' values are, then we know better what to do. In Lesson 6, we talked about how confusing it is when friends want us to make choices that match their own ideas, sometimes mean choices. If we have a personal code and can remember the values inside of it, we usually will make the right choices and not have to make things right later on because we made a bad choice. You see, our friends may not have all the same values that we do. You and your mentor will talk some more about values, and together, you and your mentor might be able to start creating your own personal code. That would be wonderful. Here is your new affirmation. Remember to say it to yourself out loud several times today and in the days before your next video lesson. I can choose well all of the time, even when nobody is watching. That's all for Lesson 7. I look forward to seeing you sign on next time for Lesson 8. Don't forget to take the quiz now, and then contact your mentor.